Hello and welcome everyone. I am Manali, Program Coordinator at the Shared Use Mobility Center. And before we jump into our session, I take a moment to describe myself. I have wavy black hair and red lipstick on today with a gold necklace. And on our panel today, we have Candice Xie, CEO of VIO.
Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be here today. And I'm an Asian woman, and I have black hair, black eye, pink lipsticks, and also I'm wearing a white jacket today.
And we have Melinda Hanson, co-founder of Electric Avenue.
Thank you, Manali. Great to be here. Melinda Hanson, auburn curly hair, wearing eyeglasses and a blue dress today.
Wonderful. And we have Avra Vanderzee, VP of Strategy and Policy at Superpedestrian.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Avra, and I have brown hair that's below my shoulders and red earrings.
And then we have Dan Jatres, Policy and Program Manager at the City of New Orleans Mayor's Office of Transportation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to join you all. White male with brown hair, beard, and wearing a blue shirt.
Lovely. So welcome to you all, and welcome to this panel, How to Save the Planet with Micromobility. I imagine many of us think about how our day-to-day choices impact the planet, but what about the choices we make about our transportation and how we get around our cities? Can we save the planet with micromobility? If yes, then how? So I have a question to start us off, and I'll let you take it from here. So the first question being, are we seeing that this idea of build it and they will come true for micromobility? And what's ridership looking like around the country? Avra, do you have any thoughts on this, and would you like to start us off?
Sure, I'd love to. What a great question. And thank you for convening this panel to talk through all these important issues, which for me really boil down to how to fulfill the industry's potential. And here by industry, I mean micromobility within the broader transportation context. So first of all, ridership, right? As COVID hit at a time when many operators were asked to suspend their operations or did so because of ridership, we actually at Superpedestrian launched our first program. And now a year later, we're in over 40 cities and we see really interesting riding patterns emerging. One, utilization is back, very much so. We are seeing higher than 2-3 trips a day in many of our markets, and that's true in a wide range of cities. So Hartford, it's over 4, Vienna, it's over 3, small cities, big cities. We're also seeing that our average trip length is approaching 2 miles at 1.75. We think in part because of our vehicle stability and the types of trips that people are taking, but with 40% of car trips at less than 2 miles or 2 miles or less, and report after report talking about how scooters are used to replace car trips, this is encouraging, incredibly encouraging as a data point. And then third, we're seeing use in communities of concern and equity areas to be very high. In Seattle, over 15% of our trips are in equity zones. And this is showing how vital the service is, throughout COVID and as cities are reemerging. But in terms of your build it and they will come question, I think of that's a hard one, yes and no, I would say. The industry is definitely maturing out of its infancy. But as we move through the different phases, I often wonder if we're learning, the industry is learning from its mistakes. When you think about the phases, or the way I think of it is phase 1 is, starting in 2008 with docked bike share and Believe, those are station-based programs that resulted from long procurement cycles and intensive siting work. But there was an absence of competition, which often hampered creativity and innovation. Then you had phase 2 and the early dockless bike share emerging first in China. That was, I think, around 2015. That had all the parking and bike litter and sustainability problems. And then you had phase 3, which was the rise of the electric scooter share in 2018. And while that showed the incredible popularity of scooters, electric shared scooters, it followed the deathless bike playbook in a lot of ways, which involved, a rush to the market with off-the-shelf products, often without developed parking solutions, and really a lack of genuine city engagement. So when I think about the build it and they will come question, I think we're finally in a new phase 4, let's call it, right? And at Superpedestrian, we came as a second mover with our first principle of safety, safety, driven by engineering and by an urban planning mindset. And as a company that never launched an off-the-shelf scooter, we are happy to see that the industry has higher expectations now. They're demanding safer vehicles. Our city partners are asking for better parking, innovations that protect pedestrians. And so, I'm hopeful. But a question actually, for Dan, as from the city side, is there collective amnesia? Is there, accountability? And I know New Orleans launched social bicycles, many years ago, and has always been an innovator in this space. So would love to hear from you about how you're thinking about things.
Yeah, so as you said, we had a bike share system that launched in late 2018 under social bicycles, and that as the industry was maturing, like you referenced, social bicycles became Jump, and then part of Uber, ultimately part of Line. And when that final transition happened, they stopped operating in New Orleans. So we're on the verge now of restarting a new bike share system. We're less than, we'll say, 50 days away from launch. So we're really in recrafting our system over the last year or so, as we've been working with a new community nonprofit partner to set this up and get it launched. We've been trying to be very focused on what worked well in the previous system for those first 2.5 years, and what lessons can we learn to try to avoid some of the mistakes and the growing pains of the past, and really, hit the ground, rolling, not running, and achieve our goals that we have around equity and access quicker, and hopefully pick up, exactly where we left off in March of 2020, instead of being back at the ground level again with the system.
Hey Dan, thanks for sharing. And I have a very quick question for City of New Orleans, since you have experienced 2 different types of bike share system, and you also just mentioned there are a lot of lessons learned by the city. Would you mind sharing with the group and also with the audience here, like what are some key learnings and key takeaways between these 2 bike share programs?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the areas, and some of these are still going to be speculative, how much we've been able to learn or put into practice what we think we've learned, since we don't have the system up and running yet. But I think one of the areas where we're really hoping to be able to expand upon is around equity. We had a low-income price plan for our residents that was well utilized in the previous system in terms of the number of rides per user, but its depth into the community was still fairly modest compared to certainly what we knew the universe of potential eligible residents were. So we think that's an area where with this new nonprofit model and that nonprofit and the city being very in lockstep about the potential that this low-income plan could have to really bring new transportation options to our residents, where 20% of New Orleanians don't have access to a motor vehicle, or 20% of New Orleans households don't have access to a motor vehicle. So there's a very large pool of people that we want to be providing more transportation options to, and we think this can be one of those options, and really connecting the community more with that they know it's an option, and that they can know it's an affordable option through this low-income plan. So I think that's one of the areas where we're really hoping those lessons learned from the past, what kind of engagement works, what kind of engagement is less effective, and how do we really connect to the person on the ground, and help them know that here's something you can use, whether it's for one trip a week that works for you, or becomes a primary means of transportation that you didn't have access to before.
And to pick back up on what Manali teed up around the building it if they will come, that really made me think about infrastructure and the sort of city infrastructure that needs to be built to support any form of non-car transportation, which we know is pretty severely lacking. I think there's a lot of good evidence internationally to show that building connected and protected bike lanes helps to encourage people to cycle and to take electric bikes. Most recent example that's really lapping a number of other cities is London is doing a tremendous job of this. But curious to hear from both Avra and Candice, and maybe also Dan, are you guys seeing any correlation among with better rides, more rides per day happening in cities with better infrastructure? Can we start building and expanding the case for the building it if they will come in the cities that your companies operate in?
That's a great question. I can field it. I mean, we're definitely seeing in some of our smaller cities, city partners, where there's a deep partnership. In Asbury Park, New Jersey, they're building out a lot of infrastructure, and we're seeing tremendous ridership. And in some of our larger cities, we're also seeing, there's sometimes in those cities there's more operators, and so we are seeing, there's more room for more vehicles. So the trend of more bike lanes, more, cycling lanes, whether they're for scooters or bikes, is, from my perspective, anecdotally, and I haven't dug into all the data, is definitely bearing out in terms of, I think, part of the reason that ridership is increasing. It almost feels like, Superpedestrian wasn't live before COVID, but it almost feels like, from the numbers that I was just aware of being in the industry, it almost seems like the industry is growing kind of more so than ever before. We know that we need transportation solutions. We know that scooters are incredibly popular, and we're seeing that ridership. I think one of the questions about infrastructure, I couldn't agree more. The most important thing, protected lanes, that from the minute you leave your house, or the minute you leave point A to the minute you arrive in point B. I think we're also starting to see, and this makes me really excited, some of our city partners thinking about and encouraging universal parking solutions, ways where private and shared vehicles can kind of cohabitate. They're not for a single purpose. They're not for one ownership type or form. It's about multi-use, multimodal. And I feel like the beginning of that is just finally bearing fruit as well.
So from VO, we also see pretty similar trends as Link sees in the city. So a lot of our strong correlation, especially in the medium-sized cities, that if we have stronger bicycle community, have better bike infrastructure, we do see micromobility is easier and well accepted by those community and have high ridership as well. In bigger city, I would say the majority of the ridership also happens near the area, has pretty well established like bike lane and bike infrastructure as well. And for the second point, Avra just mentioned, it's infrastructure like bike parking, that I actually cannot agree with more, because destination facilities are like an essential element for the multimodal transportation networks in a lot of VO city, because we always work on longer term relationship. We invest in the community and we help the city to build out like parking infrastructure to ensure like micromobility are parked safely, responsibly, and also in an ordered way. And I think that also it's helpful to increase the acceptance rate for people to use micromobility.
And a sort of follow-on question to that, how much, Dan, are you guys in New Orleans thinking about micromodal infrastructure as part of your sustainability and climate strategies?
Yeah, and apologies to everybody. Apparently there was some audio issue when I was talking before. Hopefully it's resolved now. I've switched over to a phone line. Yeah, Melinda, on that aspect, so we have a climate action plan in the city that's actually in the process of being updated right now. And it has a fairly large component of that plan around transportation. And we have some ambitious goals in there about changing trips to non-automobile trips, 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. And how that gets implemented was going to include a strong focus, or is going to include a strong focus around both transit, traditional public transit, and also, these emerging or things like bike share, possibly scooter share in the future, things like that. Some of those are we're approaching or on a different timeline now than we originally thought, because we had a scooter or a bike share program when the original climate action plan was developed. Now that we're doing this update, changing what our timelines and kind of approach are because of the reset that we're working to implement. So we don't have as many hard metrics yet as to what scale of the role micromobility will have in the climate action plan. And we're really hoping that we'll have a much clearer picture somewhere, 1 to 2 quarters into relaunching the system and getting some, real data to then help inform both the city and our nonprofit operators on, what are the realistic goals and endeavors that we should be trying to reach for. And of course, all that will be contingent on the financial resources and the financial sustainability that we're able to create. That's one of the opportunities, but also one of the big challenges of our new approach is we don't have the venture capital funding behind one of the larger companies like we had in the past. So we'll have a much stronger focus about how do we raise that money, generate that money within our community, and that would have a big impact on what kind of scaling up that we can even have with micromobility that is based in a non-venture capital funded environment.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that you guys are thinking about it, because I think it took a while for light electric micromobility to be taken seriously, I think, by cities. I mean, obviously things move a little bit slower by necessity, but I do feel like there is a bit of a shift happening now, and cities are taking it more seriously as a real solution. And I think part of that is because of the popularity of the programs, but also part of it is because companies have finally gotten their act together and are taking sustainability more seriously. Just as some evidence of this change, Electric Avenue has been doing a lot of work with Voi in Europe, and they're working in 55 different cities. We recently did a survey asking the cities how many of them are considering or really see electric scooters and electric bikes and shared systems in particular as part of their long-term vision for sustainability. And 70% responded that they did, which was really nice to see. Also, a similar number of cities claimed that they were planning to massively expand their connected and protected infrastructure. So it's really nice to see that linkage is being made, because I think you can't possibly have scalable or these systems operating at the scale that they need to have real climate impact unless we really have that supportive infrastructure as well.
It's such a great point, Melinda. I mean, I think one of the things we're seeing, and we hope this was true in the early days of the industry, we hope this would be the case, and we're seeing, evidence and reports that make it clear that it's true. The idea of the role of the shared vehicle as both a complement to transit and a supplement to transit, and that has been encouraging, to say the least, in that, we're hearing from riders. We had a rider in Hartford who, was a user of the local bus service to get to work, but the bus only runs every hour. And so, would basically use our scooter, Superpedestrian scooter, when he missed the bus. And so saw it as kind of a supplement. We have a lot of riders report that they use it to connect to transit, or more importantly, to connect to optimal transit. So it allows them to get to the better bus station or the better transit stop. And we're seeing that is, kind of expanding even the use cases that we imagined, where it's sometimes point to point, it's sometimes multimodal. And for any one type to compete with a privately owned, single occupant car, you need all of these options. But creating a resilient system is interesting, especially as what we've seen over the last year is that so many municipalities in the US are cash strapped, and they're sort of pouring all of their energy or, a lot of their funds into subsidizing public transit, as they should. And this becomes a supplement and a complement in a way that's meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah, Avra, to build on that complement and supplement, one of the other opportunities we're I would say enjoying right now as we're standing our bike share system back up. Our transit system has been going through a very significant transition from a delegated management model back to a totally in-house team from top to bottom. And that has, in some ways, been kind of similar, that we've restored a completely local control to our transit system, the way we've now have complete local control over the bike share system. So the opportunities for ideas to be bounced around between the two entities, and how can we structure partnerships and to find those complements to each other, or the way that they can build on each other, first and last mile kind of connections, co-locating bike share particularly at the most used transit, at the transit hubs and busy transit stops, shared fare structures, things like that. I think we have a lot more opportunities to do that now, because all the decision makers, are right here in New Orleans and can be in a room together and can see, the mutual benefits that are possible, that were maybe a little more foggy in the past when, there were multiple competing priorities without that centralized local control.
A question for everyone is anyone worried about the trend to continued growth in SUV purchases? Does it cause concern, or is the idea that this is a problem that can be mitigated with all of this energy going into the micromobility movement?
It's a big concern for me. I mean, I think the move toward electric SUVs is obviously amazing. It's a huge improvement, but it's not the total problem solver, because the size of these vehicles necessitates a significantly larger battery. So the environmental impact from the mining is very significant. So there's that whole sort of environmental side of things. And then there's just the fundamental fact, in my mind, that large utility vehicles don't have a place on dense urban streets. They just don't make sense. You don't need an SUV like that for the most part. Of course, there are exceptions for folks who run construction businesses, et cetera. But for the most part, your average citizen does not need to be driving a 6-ton vehicle in denser transit-served urban environments. And the more SUVs that we have on our streets in cities in particular, I think the fewer people that will be interested in taking light electric modes, just because the pure weight imbalance between being a person on a street and having to contend with these huge SUVs, some of which tower over where your head would be riding an electric scooter or sitting on a bike. So I would like to be as supportive as possible of the move toward electric SUVs, but I think this is really an opportunity for cities to step in and to have more rules around what types of vehicles are allowed on city streets. The only example I've really seen, so much of restricting vehicles in cities so far, of course, are the low emission zones that we're seeing in areas across Europe, which is very promising and exciting, and that restricts motor vehicles of all kinds. But we're also seeing in places like France some very specific policies to focus on the weight of the vehicle. So it's not just about the emissions, it's also about the weight. And if you want to buy an SUV or use an SUV, that's okay. But we're going to charge you to bring in some of the externalities that exist. So I would love to see US cities exploring some of these models as well.
I also wonder, I mean, maybe this is the optimist in me, right? But I mean, if every SUV in the world was electric, would people still opt to sit in traffic if there was an alternative and convenient option available? And that's the crux of the question for me, because my hope and thought is that they wouldn't, that shared micromobility, bikes and scooters, it's really an excellent form. It's fun. You have freedom to go point to point, to connect. If you don't own it, so you don't have to maintain it, you don't have to schlep it up your stairs. It's enjoyable in addition to being fun. It's fast, right? So it's like you can get from place A to place B so much faster. So there's this hope I have that if you build it, they will come, that with the right policies, and with the right vehicles, right? The ones that are safe, people need to feel safe, and the ones that are, and the reliability of the service, we can get there. I think one of the challenges, how to make it reliable, how to make the number of vehicles available, right size for a given city. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have. If we could provide those alternatives and make them reliable, we're, making strides to making sure that SUVs don't clog the urban environments that we live in. I mean, I guess a question for the panelists, Melinda, do you have thoughts? I know you work with so many various different providers. What are some ways from a policy angle we can push for increased reliability?
Increase rideability of
reliability.
Reliability.
How do we increase reliability so that it's truly an alternative to the personal car?
Yeah. I mean, I think what we're seeing, and most of the places that I'm working with right now are in Europe, but I think cities that have allocated real space over to micromobility, shared electric micromobility, are a lot happier with how the programs are running and are a lot more comfortable with scaling them. A good example of this is Paris has these virtual corrals in place now. So you can't just leave your scooter wherever you want. You have to actually put it in one of these corrals, which they're demarcated with some paint on the sidewalk, but it's also visible on your app. And so I think, we need to see, I think what we found from this whole experiment, right, is that riders prefer free floating, cities prefer docked. And I think what Paris is experimenting with is something that's kind of an in-between point, where we have kind of the best of both worlds, because you don't have to put this hard infrastructure places. It can be a little bit more flexible. You don't have to worry about having a specific dock and getting to a dock and having it be full, because you can just show up and leave it in the zone. So I think in terms of reliability, having cities be willing to give the space for parking in particular, since that's where a lot of the complaints and the issues with these systems kind of arise. Having cities be willing to transform parking spaces over to these corrals and put them all across the city will go a really long way toward improving reliability and just overall happiness with the systems.
So Avra, to build on Melinda's point, I think one of the area we can see why the car is still very popular is that it can actually fulfill a lot of trips. Mm-hmm. Like standard scooter cannot fulfill. I think it's a responsibility like all of the vendors and also provider need to take as well in order to increase the accessibility for the program, because reliability of the program also comes with accessibility first. So from VO's example, we actually have different models in our portfolio. Like we provide bike, we provide scooter, and scooter we provide sit down and stand up. And I think a lot of allergy we heard is that stand-up scooter is very much associated with one specific demographic type, and within our ridership we do see a lot of male is using the stand-up scooter compared to women, and that's the reason why we developed our sit-down scooter Cosmo, and we're seeing it can be accommodating for more women and also people with different body type and also body size. I think that is the trend and also the responsibility the scooter and also micromobility provider can look forward to as well.
And maybe a question for Dan. I know New Orleans has been a little reluctant to allow some of the free floating operators to come in, but I guess I'm curious if you could sort of spell out what types of things a city like New Orleans or some of the other cities that I'm sure you're in touch with might want to see before they allow larger scaling of these shared electric mobility systems.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things links back to part of our earlier discussion about infrastructure. Anyone that's ever been to New Orleans knows that we have a fair amount of distressed road infrastructure that we are in the process of tackling, but like most cities, the need and the resources are not in alignment. So that's one big area of consistent concern, just the safety of micromobility, particularly small-wheeled micromobility, with the kind of surface imperfections that that some of our roads, and that's a nice way of describing some of our roads as just an imperfection. There's also a lot of questions and concerns about the how it fits in with the historic nature of much of New Orleans. And that's certainly not a New Orleans only issue, but it is often one of the questions that comes up anytime being introduced or being discussed in New Orleans. And we had those same discussions around when bike share was arriving a few years ago. And that has led us with the bike share program to gravitate more towards the having the physical infrastructure for corrals, so that there's a little more order to how vehicles are being parked and left between trips, so as not to be, from a practical perspective, is not causing obstructions to other roadway and pedestrian uses, but from just like the general approach that many New Orleans citizens have of having a more orderly appearance, so as not to be detracting from the historic tout ensemble, as they like to say, of the city and its neighborhoods. And I think that approach of also has other practical benefits. One of the things that I often think about is when you've got that fixed infrastructure in place, it provides people with a greater certainty of where they can go and retrieve and access the vehicles. So it helps reduce some of that burden that might exist, particularly if you're when you're targeting equity issues, that if someone doesn't have reliable smartphone access, it can be harder to track down free-floating vehicles. But if you know that there's a physical infrastructure for docking, at a particular intersection or a particular destination, you can rely on that without having those supplemental technology tools to assist.
And I'm looking through the Q&A on here, and Candice, I think building off of your point about the sit-down scooter, Benji asks in here, are you thinking about adding cargo bikes or bikes with child seats or any other types of vehicles to your fleets? And I guess that question would be for both Candice and Avra.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I would say VO, historically, we designed all of our fleet in-house since 2017. And there are a lot more product in our pipeline that we want to roll out to fulfill more trip purpose and also trip type. So like scooters or bike with child seat is one of the very important project, because we believe we do need to consider all different purpose of trip, especially for women or people who shoulder responsibility of taking care of their child or doing different purchasing than daily commute. So it's definitely under our pipeline, and it will be soon coming to review in the next few months as well.
Yeah, that was a great question. I as somebody who's often, trying to figure out how to get my children to and from school, I'm always thinking about what else we can do as an industry, because solving that challenge of commuting with your children is really, truly a special challenge. So yes, it's Superpedestrian, absolutely. So the origin of Superpedestrian, I think a lot of people know, but they spun out of MIT Sensible City Lab. and developed this vehicle intelligence system. It's an onboard safety system, we call it VI. And it combines artificial intelligence and sensors and microprocessors. And their first application was something called the Copenhagen Wheel. The second application was the Superpedestrian Link scooter. And that scooter was actually designed, after rigorous testing and multiple rounds of design, validation, iteration, to appeal to a broad base of users. Tall users, less tall users, many different types of weights, 97% of users. So it was designed upfront to appeal to a broad base of users. But the idea is that, thinking through what's next, the scooter is not the last vehicle type that Superpedestrian puts into the world. We have a seated scooter in our pipeline. We're investigating the cargo bike. We think that's an excellent way of providing stability and allowing for at least bringing more objects around with you. And so, the iteration is just beginning. And what I do think is interesting, if I think about the history of the industry, is that you're seeing faster iteration on form factors. That's really exciting to me. We went from 2008 and dock-based systems. It took a long time for dockless e-bikes to emerge, and now then the scooters arrived. And now when you look at scooter providers in the U.S., you see that a lot of them have realized that multiple form factors is important, and the iteration is really is fast. One thing I'll say is we don't want to go back to a world in which we launch off-the-shelf products that haven't gone through that comprehensive testing and validation that elevates the safety of the industry. And so I think there's a balance there, and I think it's about innovating on one hand and also rigorously testing and having that engineering first, safety first approach on the other.
There's a question in here also from Mackenzie Love about SUVs and what the specific concerns are. So from what I understand, Mackenzie, the research on that, if you saw some of the reports out of NHTSA and some of the federal government, the pedestrian fatalities in the US has been going up. And a lot of that is attributable to the increase in use of SUVs. I think what you have here about the issues with the decreased visibility is one big component. The other is just mass and speed. If you are to get hit in a city by a car, if you're a pedestrian, get hit by a city in a car and that car is going 20 miles per hour, you have a 90% chance of surviving. If it's going faster than that, you have a lower chance of surviving. And so when you add the increased weight, of course, of these SUVs, then that would decrease the speed at which the SUV driver would need to be traveling in order to present a really huge risk. And so that's my understanding, but happy to point you to different research and such in this space as well. But it is a very big concern since they are more fatal and they tend to be involved in more accidents with pedestrians and cyclists than other vehicles.
Just a question for you all. What do you all see as the biggest barrier to the wide-scale adoption of micromobility? Is it infrastructure? I
would argue yes. I think anyone who rides a vehicle like a micromobility vehicle, as the points you were making previously, Avra, around the convenience side of things, right? There's so many benefits around the convenience side of things for taking these smaller, more right-sized vehicles. They're also less expensive. They're easier to park. They're fun to ride, right? It's way more fun to be on an e-bike than it is to be stuck in traffic in a car. So I think the biggest real hurdle is that a lot of people don't feel safe on them, and that is completely fair. I am currently pregnant, actually, in my third trimester. I am an avid cyclist and e-scooter user, but I am not riding right now because I'm too scared in the city of New York. And I think that's saying a lot. We need connected and protected infrastructure. If I was living in Copenhagen, Amsterdam, any of these places that had this good infrastructure, I would ride my way to the hospital to give birth. So I think it's a big obstacle for a lot of people, and I worry about the scalability of this solution, especially scalability to a point that will have significant sustainability impacts unless we get the infrastructure right.
The first time I tried Superpedestrian scooter, I was 8.5 months pregnant, and was really appreciated how sturdy and robust it felt. And I was in in a protected area, and thought, well, what would the city be like if we had protected lanes, not just bike lanes, but protected lanes, and that difference is so important.
I think to build on Melinda's point, as a provider, I also agree, like infrastructure is the biggest hurdle right now for the micromobility to grow in different cities. One analogy we always heard from our users is that they said driving the car is use the metal to protect your body, but using a scooter is use your body to protect the metal, which I think reveals a lot of people's concern because they don't feel safe if they don't have a safe area to ride a scooter or ride a micromobility vehicle, and they felt very unprotected if they need to travel alongside with cars, which is 1,000 times heavier than themselves. So I think that reveals the true challenge for the scooter industry to be adopted. And also one of the important elements for micromobility is convenience. Convenience comes with deployment number, but without the infrastructure, the deployment number is very hard to be increased, because I think the city and the provider have mutual concern about safety. So in summary, I believe like as well, the infrastructure is the first barrier we need to remove together. It takes time, but I think we do have faith to work with the city to build the best system for our communities.
There's a question on the Q&A also directed to Dan about whether or not you're thinking about explicitly tying the city's micromobility rollout to the transit system. So through policies around locating your bus stops, distribution to hard to serve areas, et cetera.
So not necessarily immediately at rollout. One of the strategies that we're using to keep our costs reasonable at rollout is we were luckily able to reuse the existing on-the-ground station infrastructure. Jump donated that to the city from the previous program. So we are operating within the existing footprint that existed. So some of those are already, co-located or in close proximity to transit routes. So we have some opportunities there, but certainly moving forward, either in adjusting locations of existing infrastructure or expanded infrastructure. And that can be done in partnership, because our transit system, as many around the country have been doing of late, has embarked on a transit redesign initiative that they are now going to be rolling out over the next, in early 2022. So they'll be doing some shifting to their network around the lines themselves, the frequencies. So there'll be a lot of opportunities as both systems are, undergoing these rapid changes to where are they best going to be able to support each other or fill in gaps that one or the other may have.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to jump in, and I wish we could keep the conversation going, but we are coming to time. I want to thank all of you for participating. So thank you, Candice, Melinda, Avra, Dan. Really appreciate your time and this conversation. Lots of insights on, sharing trends, how riders are choosing to use micromobility, and what cities are doing to respond to the changing landscape of micromobility.